Hey everybody, you're here with Luminol on the Wall. I'm Becky, and I just read a very interesting article. A small farm just south of Calgary just had 800,000 honeybees stolen from them. Now, this was no crime of opportunity. This was like a planned heist. This is some Ocean's 11 shit. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be caught dead stealing any bees. I don't want to get stung, and I just don't want to mess with them, right? I think that's the majority of people. So this leads me to believe that maybe it's some other beekeepers, or at least someone who's well-versed in beekeeping of sorts. Could there be a beekeeping rival? Who knows? But if you see anyone floating in that liquid gold, especially local, you got to call the High River RCMP. You got to report that shit because, who knows? They could be the thieves. Those bees have been in that family for 40 years. You got to return them and get them back to the rightful owner. So, with that little piece of news and information, let's get to the case. Anna Lisa Raymundo was born on September 11th in 1970 in Brooklyn, New York. Her parents were Dr. Renato and Susan Raymundo. She came from a really loving family with 2 siblings. She had a sister named Bernadette and a brother named RJ. Now, Anna Lisa attended Harvard University in Boston, Massachusetts, where she took government and pre-medical programs, and she graduated magna cum laude. She then went on to attend Columbia University, where she got a master's degree in public health. So she was a pretty smart cookie. And in March of 2000, Anna Lisa landed a job at Purdue Pharma, and she moved to Stamford, Connecticut, where she bought a waterfront condo. Now, Anna Lisa was a really amazing woman from the sounds of it. She was super close with her family, and she made friends wherever she went. Her friends and family described her as athletic, strong, caring, and brilliant. And she captured virtually everyone's attention when she walked into a room. One evening in the summer of 2000, Anna Lisa attended a happy hour with coworkers, where she met a man named Nelson Sessler. They connected and began casually seeing one another. By this time, Anna Lisa was in her 30s, and she had a very successful career, and she was looking to settle down, get married, possibly have some children. But Nelson wasn't really ready to settle down yet. Over the next year or so, he continued to see Anna Lisa, but other women as well. And in the summer of 2001, he met another woman at another happy hour. Her name was Sheila Davalu, and she happened to also work at Purdue Pharma, just like Nelson and Anna Lisa. Now, Nelson and Sheila connected and began an affair. So let's talk a little bit about Sheila. Sheila Davalu was born on May 11th, 1969. She grew up in Iran. Her parents both were medical and health professionals. In 1978, when Sheila was only 10 years old, the Iranian Revolution, also known as the Islamic Revolution, had begun. And in the following years, Iran was in turmoil, and Sheila and her family fled and immigrated to the United States. They settled in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County, New York. Now, by the age of 19, in an effort to maintain cultural tradition, Sheila entered into an arranged marriage with a man named Farid Mousavi. At that time, Sheila also attended Stony Brook University, where she graduated with a degree in biochemistry. And after graduating from Stony Brook, Sheila continued her education at New York Medical College in Valhalla, New York. While there, she met a bright young and attractive man named Paul Christos. The two were attracted to each other and hit it off really quickly, and their connection soon evolved into a sexual affair, even though Sheila was still married to Farid. And roughly a year into Sheila and Paul's relationship, Farid called his wife, and to his surprise, a man answered the phone. It was Paul. The two men were equally confused as to who they were speaking with, and they agreed to meet over coffee to sort things out. During their conversation, Paul profusely apologized. He had no idea Sheila was even married. Farid, while surprised, wasn't devastated. He saw this as a very clean way to get out of the relationship, and he filed for a divorce. And the marriage ultimately ended pretty peacefully. Meanwhile, Paul was stunned. How could Sheila have hidden a marriage from him? And when he confronted her, she claimed her marriage to Farid had been arranged and devoid of love. And she promised Paul that she would get a divorce. And when she followed through, Paul decided to trust her. And their relationship continued, and in 2000, they ended up getting married. They seemed like the perfect couple. They were both successful people, Paul had began teaching at Cornell University in New York City, while Sheila landed a job as a research scientist at Purdue Pharma in Stamford, Connecticut. Now, because of the distance between their jobs, the couple compromised and they moved to Pleasantville, New York. Conveniently, this was halfway between both of their workplaces and giving each a manageable commute. In theory, this seemed like a pretty perfect solution, but in reality, they both were highly dedicated to their jobs, they worked long hours, and they didn't spend much time together, and this placed a huge strain on their relationship, and they began to drift apart and become more like roommates. So you can imagine that excitement and passion that Sheila felt after starting her affair with Nelson. So not long after the affair began, Sheila had gone to her husband Paul and informed him that her brother Shaheen was coming to visit her. But there was a pretty small issue. Shaheen was unaware that she had married Paul, and he struggled with schizophrenia. And Sheila believed that the news of their marriage would really upset her brother, which feels really weird to me because by this time, Paul and Sheila have been together a little while. How does he not even know about this relationship? On top of that, Paul had never actually even met Shaheen. He didn't attend their wedding and hadn't been a part of their lives. Paul only knew of him from stories from Sheila and her mother. But leading up to this point, he was unaware of any mental health issues that he suffered from. Regardless of the circumstances, though, Paul and Sheila agreed that he would go stay with friends and family for a couple days to avoid any issues. Now, this was supposed to be only a one-time visit, but it ended up turning into a reoccurring pattern. Paul was routinely forced to vacate his home so Sheila's brother could visit. This bizarre arrangement went on for months, and little did Paul know that Sheila was lying this whole time. Every time Paul left, it was so Sheila could have Nelson over. Over the next couple months, because of Sheila's extracurricular activities, her and Paul didn't actually spend a ton of time together. But when they did, Sheila was often gossiping about a love triangle at work. She told Paul her friend Jack was dating a woman named Melissa, but also having an affair with another colleague named Anna Lisa. Sheila was constantly asking Paul what Melissa should do in certain situations, and Paul humored his wife's gossip. But the truth was, Melissa was a fictional name Sheila used for herself. Jack was Nelson Sussler, and Anna Lisa was Anna Lisa Raymundo. So that means Sheila was discussing her own love triangle with her husband under the guise of just workplace drama she had nothing to do with. So this affair between Nelson and Sheila only lasted for a couple months over the summer until Nelson kind of had an epiphany about Anna Lisa. He realized he really cared for her and actually ended the affair with Sheila. When Nelson broke the news, Sheila seemed fairly unscathed, and so Nelson moved on with Anna Lisa and they became a more serious couple. Nelson virtually moved in with Anna Lisa even though he had his own apartment in Stamford. He spent most nights at Anna Lisa's place. Around the same time, Anna Lisa had actually started working for a new company called Pharmacia in New Jersey, but she had stayed living in Stamford. So on Friday, November 8th, 2002, just a little after noon, a call came in to 911 dispatch. The caller was female, and she said, "Yes, hello, I think a guy is attacking my neighbor. I heard yelling. And when the dispatcher asked who it was, she says, "I don't know her name, but she's my neighbor, and she lives in 105 Harbor Drive." And then the call virtually ends. Now, apparently the call is a lot longer, but in regards to the transcript, that's all I could really find. So after the call is ended, the 911 operator calls the number back to get more information, but they realize the number is associated with a payphone. So they decide to send the police to the complex, and at that point, they're a little unsure of who or what they are looking for, but then they see apartment 105, and they see that the door is ajar. When they approach, it doesn't look like there was any signs of forced entry, but when the police go inside, they can immediately tell that there was a violent struggle that had happened. The house was in complete disarray, There were plants that had been knocked over all around and blood everywhere. Then they see a young woman lying there dead. She was covered in blood. The woman happened to be 32-year-old Anna Lisa Raymundo. So officers secure the scene and they want to find the person that made this 911 call. So they start canvassing the area. They speak to Anna Lisa's neighbors and employees from all the businesses that were near the payphone. No one seemed to have seen anything out of the ordinary. Detectives also realized that the voice from the 911 call did not seem to match any of Anna Lisa's neighbors' voices. So they were left scratching their heads as to who called in. They're all a little bit confused, so they start looking at Anna Lisa's morning and her timeline. They learn that she had been working from home just like she did most Fridays, and at 10:34 a.m. she left her parents a voicemail that said, "Hi Mom and Dad, I just want you to know what's going on. I know you're busy with Grandma, but I'll talk to you sometime." So from that, detectives know that somewhere between 10:34 and about 12:15, Anna Lisa had been murdered. They believe she knew her killer as she most likely opened the door for them. And the first person of interest they want to talk to is her boyfriend, Nelson Sessler. Now, they didn't have to go searching for him because around 7:30 or 8 p.m. that evening, Nelson pulled up to the condo complex in his car. So they go speak with him. Nelson explains that him and Anna Lisa had a date that evening with friends, and he was there to pick her up. Oddly enough, within their interaction, Nelson never really asked the police what was going on or what happened to his girlfriend, and they found this really weird. So they brought him to one of the condo's side buildings and kept him there until they were ready to interview him. While there, Nelson seemed pretty unfazed and had actually fallen asleep. And this severely heightened suspicions that Nelson was involved, because who can be that calm and collected when their girlfriend just got murdered? It truly didn't seem like the actions of someone grieving. But in his interview, Nelson denied knowing or participating in Anna Lisa's death. He explained he had stayed with her the previous evening and had gone to work that morning. He stayed there all day and returned in the evening to get his girlfriend for their date. And that's when he learned what had happened to Anna Lisa. Now, what is shocking is when detectives actually go and investigate Nelson's alibi, they realize it is concrete. It turns out Purdue Pharma had amazing security camera coverage. Nelson is seen on camera clocking in first thing like he said, and then throughout the whole day, he is seen on security footage, and then it shows him clocking out when he said. So based on all the footage, there is absolutely no way that Nelson could have left undetected. So at that point, he was ruled out as a suspect. Detectives were also able to rule out a petty thief that was lingering in the area that day. Now, after this, they had no other major leads to go off of. The only thing that they had was a foreign DNA sample from a drop of blood that came from Anna Lisa's bathroom that did not belong to her or Nelson. And when it was put in the system, there were no matches available. And they didn't really have a direction to go in. When they got Anna Lisa's autopsy report back, they were hoping it would shed some light on the current situation. Unfortunately, there wasn't any physical evidence that was found, but what they were able to conclude is that Anna Lisa seemed to have been murdered with someone who knew her personally and seemed very angry with her. It had been determined she was stabbed 20 times in the face, neck, and chest. One of the wounds was so deep it had punctured all the way through to the back of her lung. She had several defensive wounds. She also suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and they believe this was done with a heavy dumbbell found at the crime scene. This attack was so brutal, and it definitely most likely caught Anna Lisa by surprise, but she fought until the bitter end. She did her best. However, the trauma was so severe that she died fairly quickly. And everyone was just devastated with this news. Her family was heartbroken. Her friends were so upset. And Nelson, he was heartbroken. It had really set in that his girlfriend was dead. And even though he had an airtight alibi, there was still suspicion amongst his and Anna Lisa's friends that Nelson had something to do with this murder. And he was kind of shunned and didn't really have anyone in Stamford to lean on and be there for him in this tough time. But out of nowhere, Sheila, his old flame, was back in the picture, and she was there to console him.
Hello, my name is Kristen Riguidel, and I'm a licensed insurance broker across Canada and in the United States. But I want to ask you a question. Is life super predictable? No, there's always going to be curveballs in life, but there's two things that I can guarantee you. One, we're all going to have to pay taxes, and two, we're all going to die. I know, it's morbid, right? But it's true. And that's where life insurance comes in. Life insurance is a selfless act. At the end of the day, it's meant for your loved ones in the event you were to pass away unexpectedly. And not that money can ever replace us, but I always liked the idea of leaving some money behind for my brothers, whether that be for their college education, or a down payment on a house, or even just time off of work to grieve. Because the last thing I would want for my family is to have to go to work and pay the bills while they're grieving. And so life insurance gives you the peace of mind that no matter when you pass away, your loved ones are taken care of. With flexible plans, affordable premiums, and coverage that fits your unique needs, I do the shopping around for you so that you can get the protection without the hassle. Because taking care of your future doesn't have to be complicated. If you'd like to discuss options, you can send me an email at krigidel15lrxc@wfgmail.ca or give me a phone call at 403-785-7670 to learn more and get a free quote today so you can live tomorrow with peace of mind.
What began as emotional support soon turned into a physical relationship once again. And meanwhile, Sheila continued lying to Paul, still using the mentally ill brother excuse to get him out of the house so she could host Nelson once again. On November 13th, 2002, just a few days after Anna Lisa had been murdered, Paul had a work meeting with representatives from Pharmacia. And in this meeting, they started discussing about how one of their co-workers had been murdered a few days before in Stamford. Even though Paul didn't know who the victim was, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was possibly related to the love triangle he had heard so much about from his wife, aka Jack, Melissa, and Anna Lisa. The more he thought about it, the more suspicious he became. And the reason why that is because Paul had previously lent his wife and Melissa night vision binoculars and an eavesdropping device to help spy on Anna Lisa and Jack. And at one point, Sheila had also bought a lock-picking kit and practiced at home. This all seemed too much of a coincidence. So when Paul got home, he told Sheila that in his meeting he learned that an employee at Pharmacia had been killed and asked whether Melissa was involved and if Anna Lisa was okay. Sheila didn't really seem shocked or surprised by this question, but told Paul that Anna Lisa was fine. And for now, that put his mind at ease. But shortly after that conversation, Sheila informed Paul that Jack and Anna Lisa had broken up and that Melissa and Jack were now together. The fact that Sheila is just basically giving Paul a play-by-play of her affair just really irritates me. First of all, most people hide that shit, you know? But for her, it's all out in the open. And I just don't understand why she would do that. You know, I just find that just so confusing. So this case gets a little weirder. We're going to jump forward to Sunday, March 23rd, 2003. Sheila and Paul were both at home when she suggests that she and Paul try something new to spice up their relationship. Sheila said she had heard of this game from a couple ladies at work, a sexy game involving blindfolds and handcuffs. The premise of the game is that one partner would be handcuffed to a chair and blindfolded while the other chooses items from the home to run across their skin, and then they had to try and guess what the object was. So Sheila offered to be blindfolded first. Paul chose several items, including a camera and a shampoo bottle, which I'm just going to throw it out there. Probably the least sexiest items you could possibly choose. I don't 100% know what I would choose, but I don't think it would be a camera. You know, I think my go-to might be a plant. I don't know. Cute little aloe vera stem or a string of spaghetti. I don't know. It's hard to come up with, I'm not going to lie. But Sheila went first, and now it's Paul's turn to be blindfolded. Sheila uses a couple items, and then Paul hears Sheila go down into the kitchen and return. She then straddles Paul, and whatever the item was, she ran it along his face, and he had no idea what it was. Then, out of nowhere, he felt a huge thrust sensation on his chest. It felt like something heavy had fallen on him. Then he felt it again. He had no clue what had happened. He then heard Sheila say, "Oh my God, I think I hurt you. You're bleeding. Something fell on you. I think the candle hurt you." So then Paul asked for Sheila to take off the blindfold, which she did. And when he saw the blood, he told her to get the key for the handcuffs, but she couldn't find them. She ended up helping Paul break the chair so he could be freed. He then told her to call 911. Sheila grabbed her phone and made the call, or so Paul thought. In actuality, Sheila called Nelson and invited him over to her house later that evening around 8:30 for a date. Now, Paul lay there bleeding out, and after about an hour of waiting, it seemed like the ambulance would never get there. So Paul begged Sheila to drive him to the hospital, and she agreed. Sheila was clearly killing time as she drove as slow as possible to the hospital. It seemed like she wasn't in a hurry to get him help. They eventually did arrive at the Westchester Medical Center, where Sheila parked literally as far away as possible in the back parking lot. It was somewhat secluded. Then Sheila got out of the car. Paul assumed she was getting out to help him. But when she opened the door, Paul noticed she had a real crazy look in her eyes, and she stabbed him one more time in the chest. Nicking his heart with a paring knife, she tried to finish him off. Absolutely horrified, Paul, with his last morsel of energy, tried to wrestle the knife away from Sheila. The scuffle took them to a grassy spot near the building, where she was yelling, "Stay with me, talk to me, Paul," making it seem like she's trying to help him, to anyone passing by. Finally, Paul is able to get away with the knife, and he shockingly ran 200 feet and found a medical resident and begged for their help. Sheila quickly caught up and asked if she could take Paul to the emergency room herself, but the resident noticed the severity of Paul's injuries and the very questionable situation and bluntly refused Sheila's request. After that, she ran back to the car and took off. The resident rushed Paul to safety and called the police. When the police arrived at the hospital, it was very clear to everyone that Paul was not injured by a fluke accident. Rather, his wife had just tried to kill him. The police left, and Paul was rushed into open heart surgery to save his life. Only about an hour later, the police caught up with Sheila, and she was immediately arrested for attempted murder of her husband, Paul Christos. In her interview with detectives, Sheila told them they were playing a game and it got out of hand, and her husband accidentally got hurt. But she didn't wish to elaborate on the details. I can only assume in this moment that Sheila is thinking less is more. You know, I would assume she thinks that Paul is dead or is going to die, and if she just sticks to her story, there won't be anyone to contradict it. But little does she know, the police had already talked to Paul and gotten his side of the story and what had actually happened. So later that night, Nelson shows up to Sheila and Paul's home in Pleasantville around 8:30. He notices it is taped off, it is an active crime scene, and he sees police presence everywhere. Now, keep in mind, this is the second time in 6 months that Nelson has arrived for a date where a brutal crime has been committed. This poor guy is probably scarred for life. If I was him, I would have so much PTSD going into dates. I would never meet another person at their home for the rest of my life. So anyways, Nelson approaches the police and he asked what's going on. And that's when the police tell him that Sheila had attacked Paul Christos. Now, when Nelson hears this, he is so confused as to who Paul was. And they explain that it was Sheila's live-in husband. And it became pretty clear at that moment that Nelson had no idea that Sheila was even married. And he's left scratching his head wondering what the hell is going on all around him. First his girlfriend, now Paul Christos. If I was Nelson, I would be wondering, am I next? But fortunately for him, that wouldn't happen because Sheila was charged with the attempted murder of Paul Christos and went to trial in February 2004. Paul fortunately made it out of surgery alive and was able to testify against her. The prosecution argued that Sheila was obsessed with Nelson and that her motive was to be with Nelson, and her husband was in the way of that. Her trial was only heard by a judge, and she was sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. And on top of that terrible news, she was also served with divorce papers. So after that trial was over and Nelson had learned some of the details of that case, he started putting things together and told police that he thinks Sheila might be connected to the murder of his late girlfriend, Anna Lisa Raymundo. And so they looked into it, and when they compared the unknown DNA from Anna Lisa's bathroom sink, it was a match to Sheila Davalloo. They realized that Sheila must have cut herself in the attack, tried to clean herself up in the bathroom, because there was no other explanation as to why her DNA would have been anywhere in Anna Lisa's home. They were not friends and had never hung out. On November 6, 2007, Sheila was formally charged with first-degree murder in the death of Anna Lisa Raymundo. Her trial began in January 2012, and in a bold move, Sheila chose to represent herself. The prosecution introduced DNA evidence found in Anna Lisa's bathroom that matched Sheila. The jury also got to hear the 911 call made from the payphone after Anna Lisa was murdered. And then they got to hear a voice analysis expert testify that the voice on the 911 call could most likely be concluded as Sheila. The prosecution also brought in Paul Christos, Nelson Sessler, and Sheila's friend Tammy to testify against her. Paul and Tammy had testified that in November of 2002, they saw a substantial cut on Sheila's thumb. When they had asked her what happened, Sheila had told them she cut it opening dog food. Sheila had also confided in both Paul and Tammy with the details of the love triangle with Melissa, Jack, and Anna Lisa. Tammy herself was aware that after Nelson had broken things off with Sheila, that she was absolutely devastated and that she obsessively tracked Nelson and Anna Lisa's movements. She had even hacked into Nelson's voicemail to see where he was going to be at certain times. The prosecution was able to prove from records from Purdue Pharma that on the morning of November 8th, 2002, Sheila had clocked out early from work around 10:30 a.m. Now, Sheila tried to convince the jury that there wasn't a way to prove that she was at Anna Lisa's condo on November 8th. After all, her phone pinged at another location. She also tried to have Paul removed as a witness because her conversation and statements made to him while married were under the Marital Privilege Act, which means that confidential communications between spouses during their marriage are protected from being disclosed in court without the other spouse's consent. However, the court disagreed with Sheila because they felt that whatever she had told Paul was not specifically told to him in confidence. It wasn't even specific to her as far as he knew. So that's why they disagreed and continued to let Paul testify in this court case. So after everything was heard, the jury went on to deliberate. But they didn't really buy Sheila's defense. The jury felt Sheila thought she was smarter than everyone and came across arrogant in the trial. Mix that with all the evidence and testimony against her, they found Sheila Davalloo guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 50 years in a Connecticut prison. This was to be served after her initial 25-year sentence for attempted murder in New York. At the sentencing hearing, Anna Lisa's father said Sheila Davalloo took away our most precious possession. She was a perfect daughter, and she was an excellent human being. To this day, Sheila maintains her innocence and has appealed her conviction several times, but they have all been denied. In 2019, police spoke with Sheila about another murder they believe she might have been involved in, that of a young woman named Nancy Smith. She was killed on December 5, 2001 in New Windsor, New York. This was 11 months before Anna Lisa's murder and just months after Sheila had started her affair with Nelson Sessler. Nancy had previously worked with Sheila at Oxford Health, and the similarities between her murder and Anna Lisa's were striking. Nancy also worked in the medical field. She was attacked in her own home and had been stabbed multiple times. But what truly caught investigators' attention was a note found at the crime scene. It read, Nelson C.T. Now, Nelson isn't a name of a town in New York, so the police speculated that the note could have referred to Nelson Sessler, Connecticut, since that's where he lived at the time. Others believed it might have referred to a popular hair band called Nelson, which Nancy may have planned to see either in Connecticut or Las Vegas. Unfortunately, that lead went nowhere. Investigators ultimately concluded that Nancy and Sheila had never crossed paths directly, and the connection between them appeared to be pure coincidence. And as of now, Nancy Smith's case remains unsolved. There's a $35,000 reward for anyone with information that could help solve her murder. Now, this might sound absolutely weird, but I am really grateful that Paul Christos got stabbed. I'm grateful that he lived, but if he hadn't been stabbed and brought this attention on Sheila Davalloo, then they may have never figured out who killed Anna Lisa Raymundo. So for that, I am forever grateful. But I'm sorry he had to go through that tragedy as well. Sheila Davalloo is unhinged. She is manipulative, calculated, and I think a little bit delusional. So I am happy that she is behind bars, and for the rest of her life she will be there. And the prison system can deal with her. Anyways, this is the tragic case of Anna Lisa Raymundo. Thanks all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
And just your weekly reminder to download our weekly episodes, follow us on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, and give us a follow on our social medias. You can find us at Luminol on the Wall. Can't wait till next week.